Are little green men visiting us from other planets? How would we even know? Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the least professional channel on YouTube. How's everybody doing today? So, I wanted to talk today about aliens and my thoughts on whether or not aliens have visited Earth and are flying around and flying saucers up in the sky for people to see. Part of the reason that I decided to talk about this today was just because I've seen a couple of UFO videos recently on YouTube that I thought were kind of interesting. So I wanted to make a video and talk a little bit about UFOs and aliens and that kind of stuff because it kind of fascinates me as a topic. It's one of those things that, you know, as my channel progresses, I'm planning on doing other videos about cryptids and that kind of stuff, and UFOs is one of those things on the list that I kind of wanted to cover and talk a little bit about, just because I personally don't believe that aliens have visited us from other planets, but there's a lot of people that claim to have seen or have seen something in the sky that they can't identify, and so it kind of just goes round and round, and people start thinking that, oh, aliens are visiting us, or, you know, there's people that claim to have been abducted. So I just wanted to kind of go into that just a little bit today, just for something a little bit fun and to break up the monotony. So most people are probably aware of, you know, the thing that happened in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico. There was a supposed UFO crash out there, and supposedly they had bodies and all this other kind of stuff. And the funny thing is I've looked into this over time, you know, I've checked out different things and having to do with different UFOs and conspiracy theories. And realistically, like, the whole Roswell thing, it was a big deal in the moment, but then it kind of died off and nothing really happened with it for another like 40 years, I think, until the 80s. And a lot of people will talk about, and one of the biggest reasons that it became a big deal was this guy came out, Bob Lazar, I believe was his name. And he came out and said that he had worked at Roswell, or he worked at Area 51, and that he knew all about the UFOs, and they had bodies there from aliens and all that kind of stuff. But the problem with him, from everything that I've seen and when I've been looking into it, is that there was no credentials, nothing that proved that he ever worked in any kind of government facility or went to any of the universities that he said that he went to. Now, the conspiracy argument there is that they wiped his records clean, that none of those records would show up just because the government got involved and went about wiping all of that out. Something that kind of bothers me, though, with that is, so in any conspiracy theory, not just aliens, but conspiracy theories in general that have to do with the government, I always love to hear when people will say things like, oh, it's a cover-up, the government's involved, and because they have been involved in cover-ups over time. But then they'll turn right around in the next breath and basically say that the government is so inept at covering things up that they're easy to figure out. You know, the average person can go in and find all this information and find all these documents and that kind of stuff. So that's always kind of blew my mind to hear about that, when people will say that, and it just doesn't make any sense. The government is good enough and big enough to have these vast conspiracy theories that encompass paying off or threatening thousands of people or tens of thousands of people, but they're incompetent enough that the information gets out anyway. So I'm not sure that you can have both there. It's kind of weird to have that kind of setup. But getting more to aliens in particular, not just in Roswell, but all throughout, especially the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, getting into the 2000s, there was a ton of different big sightings, or where people, you know, the Phoenix Lights was a big one back in the day. I forget exactly when that was, but essentially what it was, there was a set of lights, a triangular formation of lights that appeared over the city of Phoenix, Arizona, and just kind of moved slowly through the sky. People caught it on video, so there was evidence that something was there. I don't buy that it was aliens, but there was obviously, there's video evidence of some of this kind of stuff. Now, as we've discussed before, with ghosts especially, video evidence can be faked. There's obviously dozens and dozens of blatantly, clearly fake UFO videos out there where people have like CGI or added in UFOs into footage or pictures, that kind of stuff, to make it look like something was flying when there really wasn't anything in the sky. So of course there's that kind of stuff. But the thing with Phoenix Lights in Phoenix, Arizona, was a whole bunch of different people all around the city see the same thing. A bunch of different people get video footage of it. So it's not just like one person saying, oh, I got this video footage. It's a bunch of different people. So stuff like that, it really kind of makes you question, like, what was it? The fact is that, like, for most of the stuff, we'll never really know, I don't think. Now, there's been some UFO sightings and some things that, over the course of time, the government has come out and said, yeah, this was a highly classified aircraft. You know, that at the time, they weren't going to talk about it or disclose it, but it come to light, things like the B-51 stealth bomber that was being tested, different types of special, highly advanced military aircraft that were being tested, especially over like Area 51 out in Nevada. So stuff like that that's being tested, and they've come out since then, and we know that some of these sightings are probably government aircraft. Some could be private aircraft. Nowadays, some of them could be drones as well. I've got a drone that I take out and fly every once in a while. It's a lot of fun to take it up and stuff, but it's got lights on it, and I could even hang something from it if I wanted to make it look like a UFO. So there's those kind of things that are out there. So a lot of different sightings, a lot of different, whether it's video evidence or eyewitness testimony, the same kind of stuff that we have with ghosts really applies to UFOs as well. The same kind of evidence for both of them. Except with UFOs, it goes a little deeper because of all the government stuff that goes around it. And not just the US government, worldwide governments have had different things to do with disclosures about UFO disclosures, where they've said they've been tracking different things, or maybe they saw something that they weren't sure about. I think every one of them probably has a logical explanation, probably has an explanation behind it that is maybe hidden from the public eye, if that makes sense. I'm sure that there are still government tests and things like that to this day that are being carried out that could explain some of these. And realistically, like, the government's not going to come out and say that there is or there is not aliens visiting the Earth if they know. Mostly because I think that they would be afraid that it would cause a mass panic. If there were UFO, let's take this at face value. Let's say that there are aliens from another planet somewhere out there in the universe that have made their way to Earth, and they're, for whatever reason, they've decided to make Earth like a temporary base or something, and they're flying around and they're checking out and they're abducting people and that kind of stuff. If the government knew about that, any government, and came out and said, yeah, this is happening, here's the evidence, oh, and by the way, here's the little green man or gray man or whatever, to show that, yes, this is actually happening. These are actually a real thing that are visiting the Earth. I feel like that would cause a ton of panic. Like, I just feel like there would be a lot of people that would freak out, because it would be such a huge leap in what we know. And I think there's probably religious reasons and other reasons that people would just probably lose their minds, their collective minds, at the fact that, oh my God, there's aliens here. Then, like, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, had said it at one point, and maybe it wasn't him. It was either Neil deGrasse Tyson or Stephen Hawking. And now that I think of it, it was probably Hawking that said it, that we should be worried if there were aliens that were coming to visit Earth, because they wouldn't be coming here for benevolent reasons. That's basically taking our own ideas, and any time that the human race has gone off to faraway lands, whether it be during like the 14, 15, 1600s when we were kind of expanding across the globe, we show up, we strip the area of resources, we kill the locals. Like, there's all these things that we do, and I think we kind of deflect ourselves onto whatever alien race would be out there. Now, as to whether I believe that an alien race is actually visiting, I don't. For the simple fact of the size of the universe is so vast, and anybody traveling across the expanse, some of the closest stars to us that we can see that potentially have Earth-like planets where life could be, you're talking anywhere from 15 to 1,000 light years away. That's a lot of distance to cover. And if they were covering that in some kind of a large ship, for one, I seriously doubt that they would bother with any kind of like a cloaking technology. So I don't think that they would be in any kind of shape to show up here in a big enough ship to sustain them for that kind of a travel. without us seeing something. But for two, why would they hang out here? What would the Earth have? I mean, if there was resources, you would think that they would just come down and take it if they have the technology, right? Like, maybe they're scientific. You know, that's the other possibility. Maybe they're a scientific species that's kind of just looking down upon all of Earth and kind of trying to figure us out. That's a possibility, I guess, but it seems like such a weird thing that they would have to fly around and abduct people in order to make that happen. And not only abduct people, but return them with their memory still intact. Whether it's a subconscious memory that's brought up later or whatever. Like, what a weird thing. Not to mention the whole anal thing. Don't get me started on the anal probing. That doesn't make it. That is the weirdest possible thing. Imagine you flew across the universe. you flew thousands of light years from your home. You're a scientific species. You come across a planet that has life, and you're like, hey, let's go check that life out. And the first thing you do is you abduct somebody from that planet, and you check out their butthole. Like, what a weird concept. I don't understand that. But I digress from that point, because as weird as that is, there's other ideas out there about aliens, such as like they're interdimensional beings, which that's a whole other video on the multiverse and different dimensions and that kind of stuff. But I've heard that thrown out there. I've heard things of like time travelers, where they're us but from the future that have traveled back in time to observe. All of that seems like it would be really weird, especially with the time traveling one, because you would think, like, with the time traveling, they would have gotten to a point where they could travel back in time, and you would think that they would have some kind of records of the time to know that, oh, we were spotted, maybe we should be a little bit more careful. And maybe they're traveling back in time because all the records were lost. Maybe it's 10,000 years in the future and they don't remember a single thing from this year or the past several decades. But I can't imagine that would be the case if they had advanced that far. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, in general, I do think that there is a very high probability that there is other life out there in the universe. If you've never heard of it, there's this thing called the Fermi paradox, which is essentially a mathematical equation that kind of boils down the probability of life out there other places in the universe. And I don't remember the full thing, but essentially where it starts off is, if it's like if 10% of, you take 10% of the stars in the sky that we can see, and you take 10% of those having planets, and 10% of those having planets that can sustain life, and 10% of those actually having life. Like it boils all the way down the line to where it's still millions upon millions of potential planets out there that have life on them. Now, whether that life is intelligent life or not, yet to be seen. We have no way of verifying that. Maybe someday we'll have the technology that we can better see what's up there, or find a way to travel between the stars, that kind of stuff. But for now, we have no way of really telling. So one thing that I will say, though, is I think that realistically, of all of the people that claim to have seen aliens or UFOs or been abducted, that kind of stuff, I think that there's a high probability. There's a couple of different things that make a lot more sense than there actually being aliens visiting the Earth. And those are, some people are lying for clout, or lying for their 5 minutes of fame. Or any other number of reasons. Just completely making things up, and they know that they're lying. Then there's a group of people that I think honestly saw something or experienced something that they can't explain, and are boiling it down. It basically makes more sense to them that it would be aliens than something else. And these are the people that are honestly believe that they saw a UFO or something happened that they can't explain. Very similar to the situation with ghosts, when something happens that somebody can't explain and they attribute it to ghosts. Very similar to that. I think there's also a group of people out there that probably they've hallucinated something, or something that dreamed something, for instance. I remember, I don't know if you guys ever saw, there's a show called Coast to Coast AM that used to be on the radio. I don't know if it's still on. It was on one of the local stations here that I used to listen to when I was a security guard, especially. I listened to it overnight. It usually ran from I think it was like midnight to 5 a.m. or 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. It was an overnight station, so I worked overnight and I listened to this show. And one of the stories that really stuck out to me that I remember hearing, stuck out enough that I remember it today. But essentially this guy, he was talking about, he was a security guard, which is probably why it stuck out to me, because I was also a security guard. And that he worked for this company where he basically had to guard this gate, and he had to wait for trucks to come up, and then he had to go let the trucks in. And his story was that basically he was sitting in his truck and he saw this bright light come down over him, and the next thing he knew, he was being like examined by these like aliens, the little gray guys that were walking around, and they were poking and prodding him and stuff like that. And he only remembers a little bit of that, and the next thing he knows, he is back in his truck, and there's a semi truck at the gate that's honking his horn, trying to, wanting to get in. So, he goes and lets them in, but to him, he thought he was abducted by aliens. And I remember hearing that and thinking to myself, he probably fell asleep. Like, what's more likely? The fact that, is it more likely that he was abducted by aliens while he was sitting there and they returned him just in time for a truck to show up to the gate? Or that he fell asleep and was dreaming very vividly of this thing that was going on, and the truck honking at the gate woke him up, and that's why he was back in his truck right there. And it's those kind of things that I would think that he honestly believed. It sounded like from the way he was telling the story, but I can't know for sure. But you just take him at his word. If he honestly believed that he was abducted by aliens, when the more likely explanation was that he just fell asleep. It's those kind of stories that I hear and I'm like, okay, there's a better explanation here. And I think that's the case for most, just about every single alien and UFO story out there is one of those three things. Like, somebody lying, somebody honestly seeing something that they can't explain, so they're just using whatever explanation seems the most plausible to them, or hallucinating, dreaming, that kind of stuff. Those are the things that make the most sense. Just using Occam's razor, the simplest explanation, the explanation that involves the least number of assumptions, is most likely the true explanation. And with aliens, because we don't have any kind of proof that another species from somewhere out in the universe is visiting Earth and abducting people and that kind of stuff, it doesn't make sense to believe in those things as fact. Now, it's of course possible. I would say that if they had the technology to travel across the universe in all the light years to come to wherever we are, I have a hard time believing that they would be quite as easily seen. They've got to have some way of knowing like how they can stay below the radar to where people don't see them. But there's so many stories out there that I can't sit here and debunk all of them. What I can say is, looking at the simplest explanation, it doesn't make sense. And because we don't have evidence. Now, they could come out tomorrow. A UFO could land on the front White House lawn, for instance. We would still have to have doubts about, like, okay, are these actually aliens? Or maybe the United States government's not involved and some other country came up with a flying saucer looking thing and was able to, came over here and landed it, made it look like aliens. Like, there's so many different possible explanations. So for me, very similar to ghosts, until I have some kind of hard evidence that they are visiting from another planet, I can't bring myself to believe it. Like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about aliens? Like, do you think that aliens are visiting us from other planets? Do you think that, have you ever seen a UFO? I shared in my 200 subscriber Q&A video the story when I was a kid of seeing what, for me, it was an unidentified flying object. I don't think that it was aliens, but I shared the story about that when I was a kid and seeing something that I couldn't explain. Have you ever had an experience like that? And if you have, share it. I would love to hear those, just because it always fascinates me to hear other people's experiences with this kind of stuff, just because, unlike ghosts, I think aliens are a lot more plausible. Just because we don't have evidence of them, I can't rule them out as easily as I can ghosts, for instance. Like, I could say, whereas, like, we've talked about degree of certainty before, right? Whereas with, like, ghosts, my degree of certainty is, like, 5%. With aliens visiting Earth, it could be more, more like 20%, just because there's so many other factors involved. Flesh and blood aliens, we're flesh and blood, and it's say that they're a similar or different kind even of flesh, that maybe their genetic makeup is completely different, or maybe it's similar. I mean, it's feasible that there could be something out there that is very similar to humans in our body type and that kind of thing. So I can't rule that out as much as I can with ghosts. So I just wanted to kind of share that and get that out there and talk a little bit about UFOs and aliens and stuff like that, just because I think it's a very interesting topic. I think it could be a fun topic to maybe have some more videos on and talk a little bit more about in depth, and maybe look at individual stories that people have. The Phoenix Lights would be a good one that I might like to cover, although other people have covered it very well already. But that's another one of those that there's a lot of evidence that something happened, that something went on, and even there's a military base near Phoenix, Arizona, that had actually reported that they launched some flares up the night that all of that had happened. So another possibility maybe, but again, like, it goes back and forth. So it's definitely something that is worth looking into and worth investigating and talking about because of the possibilities that are out there. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for this one. I didn't really script this one out, or I've been thinking about it, and so I just wanted to kind of get a video out and talk a little bit about it and kind of gauge the reaction and see what you guys think. And I've got a couple of videos planned this week. I've got a couple that I shot today. So, and then this weekend I'm actually, I think it's looking good so far that the weather on Saturday is going to be outstanding. So if all goes well, I plan on having filming the second episode of The Reaper this weekend, so I can get that one up in the next couple of weeks, as well as filming another cemetery chat, because I've been wanting to get out and do a cemetery chat for a while. So keep an eye out for those. And that's all I've got. So I want to thank you all for watching. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.